and welcome back to Your Autism Game Plan. I'm Joya Vanderlaan, a family nurse practitioner, a functional medicine specialist, and an autism mom. We're talking about seizures today, and you might wonder, why seizures on an autism website? Well, it's because up to 30% of children with autism also have seizures. Now, they can be caused by a variety of different things, both genetic and environmental, and sometimes even physical or, problems within the brain itself. But it's also because a lot of symptoms of seizures can overlap with symptoms of autism or symptoms of other things that our autistic children may display. And so it can often be hard to distinguish between seizures or tics or stimming even. Hand flapping is kind of a characteristic, a stereotypical movement that many autistic children make. And it gets confused a lot for seizures. Let's think about, what is a seizure? What causes it to happen? Well, the root cause can be very different depending on the seizure and the child, of course. But essentially, what happens is a seizure is an abnormal outburst of electrical activity. And depending on where in the brain that electrical activity happens and to where it spreads, that will determine what the seizure looks like to us from the outside. But a seizure always has electrical activity at its core. And that is what's causing the symptoms of seizure, either the ones that we see and even the ones that we don't see. Now, seizures are pretty typically self-limited, meaning they will stop on their own after a certain period of time. Each seizure will. Now, there's an exception to this, which is called Statusepilepticus, which means seizures that either happen one on top of another without the person regaining consciousness in between, or a constant seizure, constant state of seizure. Very dangerous, very scary. And if your child has had this, you will never forget. So I often get asked, how can you tell the difference between a seizure or tics or my child stimming? Well, the big characteristic of a seizure is a loss of consciousness or an unresponsiveness during the seizure that wouldn't be happening during stimming or tics. Now, of course, the essential thing we need in order to actually diagnose seizures is an EEG or electroencephalogram. So that's where the doctors will put leads on the child's head or the patient's head, and they will gather information about what electrical activity is going on and where in the brain. So what are some other symptoms of seizures besides what we typically think of with, the convulsing and so on, which actually rarely happens in most seizures? But here's a list of things. I'm going to have it on the screen here for you, and I'll read them out loud in case you're just listening in your car. But here's the list of symptoms. Sometimes staring spells where they kind of look like they're not really paying attention. Nausea or dizziness, a loss of focus, disrupted sleep, rapid eye movements or rapid blinking, involuntary body movements, and this is what we think about typically when we think of seizures, like muscle twitching or a stiffening of the muscle in certain parts of the body or the whole body. Sometimes unusual sensations, even like sensations in the stomach or sensations like smells or tastes or tingling. Sometimes a loss of consciousness, sometimes anxiousness or very rapid and abrupt changes in mood, and then sometimes also confusion or disorientation, and that may be especially after the seizure. So one of the difficult things is a lot of those symptoms that I just mentioned could be very easily explained by something else, including autism. So it can be really tricky to figure out whether your child is having seizures, especially sort of small seizures or focal seizures that don't result in a huge display, or if it's just autism and stimming or tics, or they look like they're not paying attention because they're not paying attention. They're looking at the lights on the ceiling. So it can be very difficult to decide, which is why it's really helpful, necessary, if you are concerned about seizures, to consult an expert. A neurologist is the provider who you would go to see for seizures. And even more specialized is an epileptologist. And those are people who are specialists in the brain and in seizures. The other question that I get asked is, so are there long-term effects or after effects of a seizure? Now, immediately after a seizure is what's called the post-ictal period, kind of a recovery period, if you will, where the brain needs to recover, needs time to recover after all this electrical impulse, abnormal electrical impulse going on in the brain. And during that time, the person may feel still kind of out of it, tired, the breathing may be irregular. You want to kind of watch your child if they're having seizures in this post-ictal period, making sure that they're safe. Of course, during a seizure, the risk of injury is there. If your child is falling or bumping into things, or if they're moving on the floor in such a way that they're bumping into different things. Of course, there is risk of brain injury and memory issues and developmental delays as a result of seizures, especially if they happen over and over. When someone's having a seizure, the risk of aspiration is significant, especially if they have something in their mouth like food or water. Aspiration is when a person will breathe in the mouth contents into their lungs, which can lead to pneumonia. So that's certainly a risk as well. And then a less obvious risk of seizure activity is hyperthermia. So in other words, the body gets too hot. Think about it, all these muscles moving and contracting and uncontrolled excessive movements can heat up the body to a dangerous temperature. I hope I've taught you a little bit about seizures, whether your child has seizures or you're concerned about seizures, or if you didn't know, you should be on the lookout for seizures in your child with autism, because it is more common in our kids with autism. Next video, I'm going to go over different integrative treatments. So of course, when a person has seizures, that is a very serious medical condition. You definitely want to consult with a neurologist or epileptologist on that. But there are things that you can do like diet and some other things that we'll talk about next time. So please join me next time. I'll be releasing the video next week. We release one video every week for you for free. And I hope you will join me for that. Remember, in the meantime, be gentle with yourself. You're doing a great job.